We'll be starting in just a moment. For those of you who are here on the live Zoom webinar platform, you can start to chat among each other. I just want to let you know that when you click on chat, you will see where you post your message, a more and a down caret. You need to click on that down caret and make sure that you're posting to all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, you're kind of just talking to yourself. It's a handy little thing to know. Also, you'll be using the Q&A to submit questions to our guest, as well as any kind of technical difficulties that you're having trouble with. If you're over on the YouTube live streaming, this means you're on our live streaming web page, and you're now listening to my voice and seeing just the logo, but you see no options for a chat. That means that you're on the live streaming page. If you just scroll down below that vision, that view, if you just give it up, you can click on the Zoom webinar and join us. It'll be very quick, and then you can actually ask questions later and be a little bit more participatory. If you'd like to stay over there, that's fine, no worries. You're gonna get a great opportunity to hear everything. You won't miss anything in terms of what's going on with the speaker. Okay, well, I'm getting ready here to introduce our last speaker of the summit. My name, of course, is Cynthia Allen. And I am excited to be here on the last one. I can't believe it in some ways. And thoroughly thrilled to be introducing you to Russell Delman. And Russell has dedicated his life to the study of transformation. He started quite young in his undergraduate work in human potential psychology in 1969. He studied Zen meditation for more than 45 years. He's been working with the Feldenkrais method, studied personally with Dr. Feldenkrais with Moshe in the years of 1975 to 1978, and maintained a close relationship with Moshe until his death in 1984. He has trained Feldenkrais practitioners from all over the world, over 2,500 of them, and has also really heavily drawn on the work of Eugene Gendler and I think it's Gendlin. I'm not. I'll let Russell correct me on that. On his work of focusing, Russell founded the Embodied Life School, and he has chosen a very integral approach, in my opinion. I'll use that word, between the Zen-based meditation, Feldenkrais, focusing, nonviolent communication, a variety of other things that he has worked into his program, which I think is just phenomenal. And he has an embodied life mentorship program. He credits his marriage of 43 years with Linda, also a Feldenkrais trainer, and the raising of their daughter as one of his greatest teachers in life. And I am very, very happy, Russell, to welcome you here. Go ahead.
The sound just went out.
On me?
When you said, I'm very happy too. Can you hear me?
Funny? I'm very happy, Russell, to have you here.
For some reason, I'm not hearing you now.
You're not hearing me. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, now I've got you.
You got me? Okay. Yep. Hi, Russell.
Hi, Cynthia.
So it's good to have you.
Well, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful for the invitation.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to have you here on the last evening, partly because when I was coming up with the sort of tagline for the summit and talking about resiliency and freedom, I felt like a number of the talks would really address that issue. And I know you can also address those issues.
Yes.
But when it came to the part of impacting evolution, I felt like I had maybe not quite as many. And so I'm looking forward to the chance to delve into that. But I see right off the bat that you started with something very non-habitual. You're not wearing your habitual black shirt. You went pink on it.
Right. Yeah. I'm going spring on you.
I love it. I love it.
Flowers are blooming, and I decided to bloom today.
That's good. That's good. So, Russell, why don't you just sort of get us a little started with some of your history with the Feldenkrais work, and take that wherever you want to take it for the moment.
Yeah, so thank you, Cynthia. First, I just want to again really thank you for your inspiration in creating this unique event and for being invited. I live in such gratitude for right now for you and for my Feldenkrais colleagues who I've learned so much from over the years, a truly unique group of human beings and thinkers. And of course, to Moshe. I just got back last night from Vienna, where I was just teaching my last weekend of this trip. And of course, we celebrated his birthday, as I'm guessing you did. And gosh, it was 43 years ago. I mean, it's really in my whole lifetime, I'm so indebted to Moshe and for what he brought. And so I kind of wanted to, I don't know if this has happened already, but to kind of give a little perspective on the history here. When we started in San Francisco, there wasn't really a profession called Feldenkrais teacher, because most of us had never met a Feldenkrais teacher because we didn't go to Israel. And so we joined the training. I would say most of us, if I can speak for my colleagues a little bit, really as pioneers, and we were not joining because it was a profession. We were joining out of this kind of devotion to human potential. And we saw that this was a human being who had a doorway, a lens on human development that was unique, grounded, powerful. And a lot of us were kind of hippies. A lot of us were just from different parts of the world, different parts of life. And it's really changed so much. People now come in because they want a profession, and that's beautiful. It's a different time. But we were kind of surprised when we realized, oh, we can make a living doing this. Oh, that's kind of interesting. So it was really a pioneering spirit about the development of the human being. And I want to point back to that when you brought up the term evolution, because in my opinion, that was really Moshe's deep interest. That, of course, he loved that people moved better and that people were suffering less when they get sessions or go to classes. But in my read of Moshe, he was passionate about human freedom as a potential and the clear recognition that awareness was a path to freedom. And maybe I can talk a little bit about that. Does that feel okay for you?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So, Moshe really saw that most of us are living in an automatic kind of state, automatons, that we were not really human beings. And of course, with his witnessing of the pogroms in Ukraine and the Holocaust and the sense, which is so relevant to the modern world, what we're dealing with politically in the world, that the sense that human beings didn't know how to think for themselves, and that we were conditioned to environments through our societies, through our parents, that really limited our sense of possibility. And he really took us to task of, can you become the human being that you're here to be? And that became my passion, is both for my own path, for my own living, and for my teaching. Again, I love that people learn to move better or they feel better in their bodies, but I have an analogy I like to use. Imagine that you loved Mozart. You can pick anything. I happen to love classical music, but imagine you loved Mozart. And when you heard Mozart, your spirit rose. You felt thrilled. You felt touched to your core. And then it was discovered that Mozart was good for depression. And then you heard a few years later that the purpose of Mozart is to get rid of depression. And then you go, no, no, don't you see? It's wonderful that it works on depression, but it's much more than that. And that's what I keep wanting Feldenkrais students and teachers to kind of get, is that, and I think many do, I don't think I'm unique in that, but it's really in the foreground for me that we're learning to be human.
Well, I do think it's a really big issue for us to grapple with. At least it is for me in my practice, Russell. I found that, at least for me, when I overstressed some of those particular aspects, it was a little harder to make a living.
Yeah.
And so I found for myself that I was willing to start to couch the work much more in what I would call neurological or orthopedic terms.
Yeah.
And then hope that I would be able to make that deeper connection with people once they were in my door. And some really like that deeper connection. Many, I find that's not their thing.
Right, right. And I totally support that. I mean, I don't think it's helpful to go out and speak about the kind of further reaches of the work as an entry point for most people. I mean, it really is, I'm comfortable with the word spiritual, so I call it a spiritual path. But if we just call it a truly human path, for me, that's the same thing. So we don't need the word spiritual. So it's a truly human path. But most people won't relate to the language of awareness or growth. They're in pain or they're suffering in some way. That's the doorway.
Right.
We don't need to. It's helpful when we can have the larger vision, not to impose it on anybody, but to hold it for ourselves and for that potentiality, which it's amazing to me that so many people really have that in them, although they don't know it. And I can't tell you how many people have come to me with a stroke or with some really very challenging pain condition. And over time, they start seeing it as a gift. They start seeing their life as a path, and that this is something so they start viewing their circumstances from a much larger perspective.
Yeah. So for me, I often talk about that it's all part of a growth process. And even though it looks like an injury, and it is an injury, or it is an assault, and then we certainly wouldn't have wished to have had a stroke or whatever it is, that we're not really broken, but we're continuing to grow into this life experience, whatever comes our way.
Right, right. That's so good. And again, never to impose this on somebody who is looking for something else. We have to humbly respect people's intentions and what they're there for. It's just, for me, and it's very personal, it's a life path. And the life path touches, as near as I can tell, the highest and deepest that's possible for human beings. And that's what keeps me motivated every day. And I don't necessarily talk about it to a student, but for a surprising number, and I guess it's also because what they've heard about me and what they're very open, even coming with that perspective already. But that picture, that without awareness, I would say this is what I got from Moshe. He never said it like this, but what I bowed to him for how this came to me, that without awareness, you must repeat the past. Your brain will do what it already knows how to do. That's just the way, it's like the law of gravity. It's, if you have these grooves in your brain, those are the grooves that are going to work. So if we consider the ability to respond in new ways to our life as, well, what is freedom if you don't have the ability to respond in new ways? So if we look at freedom in a very strict definition, new responses, that awareness is a prerequisite.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began to see that, well, to be aware, you have to be present in yourself. Because if you're absent, if you're lost in your thoughts and feelings of the past and future, you're not open to the new possible information. So to be present was a precondition for awareness. Awareness is a precondition for freedom. And then I realized this fabulous discovery of Moshe and some others, but he really nailed it, in my opinion, is that embodiment is a doorway to being present. That to be embodied, to be here, like if the people listening right now can take a moment and just feel their bottom on their seat if they're sitting, or to sense their right foot is touching something. Their left foot is touching something. And just, you can still hear my voice, but just doing that brings you into present moment. You can't feel your bottom and your feet and be thinking about dinner. You're here. And the here-ness of embodiment is what brings us to presence, awareness, and the possibility of responding in new ways to your partner when they give you that look. Or your child when they're having that, or whatever it is. You know, I'm talking real stuff. This is not airy-fairy stuff. This is our everyday life. And do I have the possibility of responding differently when I hear that politician talking in that voice? Or am I wedded to my reactive pattern?
Right. Yeah. Well, Russell, I'm curious about whether or not this whole embodiment is a doorway to being present had anything to do with the fact that Moshe did not become a guru. You know, I just got done watching Wild Wild Country about Osho, or early on called Bhagwan Rajneesh. And I was, I mean, actually, weeks later, I'm still thinking about it. It was just incredibly disturbing and powerful. This is the same time frame, however, that Moshe was coming to the United States in the same movement. What happened? At least it seems clear to me that he never became a guru. If he did become a guru, he was not a very successful one in terms of amassing wealth or vast followers. So could you, what was the difference?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. I have not thought about it, but it's very clear to me right away. Feldenkrais really was devoted to each of us finding our own truth, each of us manifesting our truth in our own ways, learning from him, his famous statement from the San Francisco training, which I'm sure many have heard, which was, I don't want you to learn how to write like I write. Learn your own handwriting, develop your own handwriting for this work, but make it legible. So it's not just that any old scribble's going to work. It's not just, oh, do what you want and call it Feldenkrais. It has order. It has certain kinds of something like rules or an order to it. But it was so interesting when I reflect back on how committed he was to not having little Moshes. And how committed he was to the, what do I want to call it? I want to call it the, he wouldn't have said this, but I'll say it, the preciousness of each human being. And in my language, I think he would agree with it, that we each have a different gift to manifest. And through awareness, you clear away some of the rigidity of your past that's not helpful for your gift. Now, that doesn't mean, in my opinion, a lot of our suffering in our past, a lot of our wounds are essential for the gift we're going to bring. It's not about getting rid of them, but it's about not being controlled by the faulty conditioning of the past. That's another way of looking at freedom. And he was passionate about that for each of us. And that is not a guru's position where they are looking for devotion. And let's even speak about maybe the noblest of gurus, because there are guru traditions that are noble. They are not looking, as Rajneesh was, for I don't want to judge what he was looking for. I don't
right, but we don't know really.
But when I look at Dalai Lama, or look at some of the Tibetan traditions that are guru traditions, in my opinion, they are not accurate for most people in today's world. I really believe consciousness has shifted, that we are in a different stage of development where the guru model is no longer accurate for most people. It's still accurate for some. And it can be a path of freedom when the guru is clear enough in what they're really dedicated to. And it is so, as we see with so many, the seductions of being in a new culture and being sensual, and it's just so easy for power to be abused.
Yeah.
And that just seems to be the norm. So I'm suspicious of traditions that ask you to trust in another without question. And that's what, I mean, in certain, really authentic Tibetan guru traditions, they'll say, if your guru asks you to jump off a 20-foot or 100-foot pole, you do it because you trust that they know you better, they're devoted to you. I don't see that, certainly for me, but I also have the picture that consciousness is not static, it is evolving, and that at different times in history, different methodologies are more effective.
Absolutely. I can totally agree with that from my perspective as well. So Feldenkrais had this statement that it's actually not super unique, because we know other people have made it too, that life is movement. And yet you have really explored Zen meditation, which seems incredibly still to me. and has a little bit of guru-ness to it in its lineage, and a little bit of still, a little bit of rigidity even in my perception. Now, this is from an outside point of view.
Right.
So I'm curious about how you see the stillness of meditation, or this model of Zen with this kind of contrasting model of Feldenkrais. How do they come together? Yeah. What's the intersection that works for you?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, let me start by saying, in my opinion, there are things that you can learn in movement, especially Feldenkrais movement, that you cannot learn in immobile traditions. And there are things in traditions of stillness that you can learn that you cannot learn through movement. That's my opinion. Or it's rare to learn in movement. Now, let me specify that a little further. So first of all, when we're sitting in external stillness, when the body is mostly still, what you get to experience is all the subtle movement that's alive, the movement of breath, the subtle energetic movements in the body, and most important, the movement of thought and feeling. It's a huge amount of movement. Now, when you're engaged with the movement of the physical body, it's so overt and so compelling that it's much more difficult to really notice the nuance of the stories you tell yourself about yourself and about life.
Mm-hmm.
And what I am passionate about, what's very, very important to me for my own development and for my students, is that we learn to observe with great warmth, kindness, and clarity our self-stories, the stories we tell ourselves, about others, and about life. And to really get intimate with the self-story and begin to really question your own version of events about who you are is much easier to do, not easier, much more directly done if you're not dealing with the more overt movements where I'm interested in how my shoulder is moving and I'm paying attention to my whole self. The storyline tends to get into the background, which is wonderful. But to change in everyday life, to really change how we are partnering, how we are parenting, how we are living in our own self-image, to learn to see and experience our self-story almost from an outside perspective, yet one that's full of kindness and warmth. Those two things go together for me, warm-hearted and clarity. Warm-hearted clarity, that we really see the story I have about who I am is not who I am, both on the positive or negative sides of that. Mm-hmm. And to see through our self-story is essential for our liberation. Mm-hmm. I'm going to see if I can close this shade to get some of that sun off of here.
Yeah, we might just be able to turn the angle of your computer.
Let's see, did that help at all?
Yeah.
I think it did, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it helped.
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Okay.
I like it.
Okay.
So
let me just pause there a second. So in stillness, we get to see the subtle movements, particularly the movements of mind. Another thing that comes in the stillness, stillness being the not gross movement of the body, but just sitting there, we get to experience, which I think is essential for Feldenkrais people, and this is kind of maybe politically correct or not politically correct. I think it's important that Feldenkrais teachers get more comfortable with discomfort and not teach comfort as an ideology. I think learning to be comfortable is a great beginning when we have new students. How can they take care of themselves? How can we take care of ourselves? But what I notice very often is that becomes an end point in itself. And what I notice, and I know Feldenkrais knew this well, he'd be shocked at this evolution of the work, that life is uncomfortable often, and growth is uncomfortable often, and learning is uncomfortable often. And if we want to stay in comfort, we are going to really limit our potential. Mm-hmm. So how do we find life-giving discomfort and discomforts that are not helpful? And that distinction is really worthy. Yeah. And when you sit in stillness, you're going to get uncomfortable. And much of the discomfort is going to be from your own thoughts. And it's going to manifest in your body as tensions, as I can't stand this, I get antsy, I want to jump out of my skin, I'm not a sitter, I'm a mover, all like that. Sitting through that is a tremendous opportunity for evolution. So I don't want people to miss that. That was part of why for my own integrity, as much as I love the Feldenkrais work, and I think it's complete in itself, for my own teaching, I needed to create a path that included sitting meditation.
Uh-huh. So I know, at least I believe what you're saying, and what I think I understand from your past conversations is you felt that Dr. Feldenkrais was disappointed in a way that people didn't I don't know that the words he would have used were awaken as much as he expected from his work. I don't know what word you would use there that would.
Yeah. Well, what I can say, Cynthia, in that vein was the one of the most remarkable conversations I had with Moshe, and I was blessed to be with him for a significant amount of time in Tel Aviv when he was recovering from strokes, and giving him lessons and just spending the rest of the day talking to him, basically, and learning so much. And for me, in my development as a young man, it was essential for my inner courage and strength, and it was rites of passage with kind of a tyrannical grandfather image or something. It was very essential for my development. And I can remember saying to him, I had observed numbers of people who had been studying with him for many years in Israel. And also noting from my own private practice, I'd been in a very large private practice at that point for about 7 years, I think, about 6 or 7 years. And I said to him, you know, Moshe, what I notice in many of my students, and I notice it here also, and my heart's beating pretty heavily when I'm saying this to him, is that some people seem to take the work and it touches their whole life.
Right.
They treat other people kindly, they're more present in their interactions. And then I see some where their movements really change, but their way of living in other arenas seems relatively untouched.
Yeah, I see the same thing, and it's very curious to me.
And I said to him, I said, you know, Moshe, you predicted that the learning through movement would generalize, was his term, generalize throughout the cortex and become almost like, he didn't say this exactly, but the implication was like a model for the rest of the brain to have this kind of awareness, this kind of flow, this kind of listening, this kind of what I call presence. And he looked at me, and I was really scared at that point that he was going to get really angry, because he could get really angry pretty easily. Mm-hmm. And he said, with a hurt look in his eye, it's the greatest disappointment of my life. Mm-hmm. And it's not that people don't do that, it's that it's not, many don't. And so what I came to see was that the power of our, what I call self-story, which includes our emotional patterns and it includes our thought patterns, that they can be so instantiated, so deeply rooted, that one can really develop freedom in movement that does not directly influence those levels of ourself. Mm-hmm. Now, I also find, and this is the wonderful news, is unlike, okay, let me say it like this. One of the unique gifts of Feldenkrais, I mean, yoga can be great, Tai Chi can be wonderful, Qigong, there are beautiful body-based traditions in the world. We're not the only one. Mm-hmm. But something unique, in my opinion, in the Feldenkrais way is the way neural patterns can be deconstructed in a way that they're not, we don't get rid of them, but in my image, their power gets reduced, at least temporarily. Often it comes back, but gets reduced so that there's an opening in the system. The system, maybe for a long time, but at least for a short time, has its infrastructure of self-identity has been loosened. Mm-hmm. And in that gap, our potential for learning is huge. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, we don't make enough use of that gap. And in my work, by adding the meditation, adding the work with our feeling life, learning to bring awareness to how we carry our feelings, learning what happens when we communicate in certain ways, we're using the gap that has opened from the movement lessons to bring that information into the nervous system.
Yeah. So if I kind of recap, it sounds like to me that when you, because of the path that you have for your life,
right,
of wanting to move forward in freedom and in evolution to become the human being that you were meant to be, I think is how you said it, that you felt, okay, something is missing in a way in the Zen side, because it's certainly no light thing that you have done 45 years of Zen. I mean, that's right. Obviously a dedication.
Right.
And
I also had to step away from my teacher.
Yes, a huge deal. I mean, that's a huge deal right there of individuation and stepping out. And then also bringing in the same thing, though, was for you for the Feldenkrais work. And then you've also drawn in some other things. And it seems like the two elements that you're saying you were really trying to capture was this element of using discomfort. Wait, actually, I'm going to add a third one. The first element was using comfort to make it safe enough to be uncomfortable, using discomfort as a way to further open the gap. When the gap is there, maybe open it even further. And I've lost the third one all at once. I had it in my head. What is curious to me is it seems like I really agree with you, Russell, that all these components are extremely important. And yet there's some other ingredient, it seems to me, that has to be present, and it has something to do with the person's intention to begin with. And if the intention is not there to uncover oneself at the deepest level that one can afford to do at any given time, because there's a reality to how much we can travel that road and be functional. Right. Then you can do just about anything and not grow out of it. And that is an element that we can't control. Yeah.
Wait. Say it. You can do just about anything.
Do about just anything and not really grow out of it. If your intention is not, I mean, if you don't have as your base intention.
Right. Absolutely.
So I think that's part of what happens is, some people just come into these different works and that was never really their underlying intention. It's not their path.
Right. And I so want to respect and appreciate that the story that I have about what's possible is not imposed. And I've got to be very conscious of that, because if I'm not, when I'm teaching, it can feel like, because I can get on fire with the teaching and it can feel like, this is the Holy Grail, don't you see? And yet it's not other people's Holy Grail. So, hey, back up, big boy.
But I think what you are willing to do in your program is you're saying you're willing to help people find that discomfort. You're willing to help people navigate that discomfort and use it to their best opportunity if that's what they choose.
Right. And I want to go, I don't want to just stay with the discomfort. I want to stay with how to bring a quality of self-observation that is so full of kindness and humor that it's not so difficult to see one's warts and one's really incredibly painful patterns.
Right.
So
that's very Feldenkrais.
Very Feldenkrais, and that's such a central part of embodied life work that we all know what it feels like to give our absolute goodwill to something in the world. whether it's our teddy bear, our dog, our child, or our grandmother. We have that experience at least sometimes. And yet it's so rare that people give that to themselves. So we do processes, what I call resource growing processes, where the neural networks of that kind of kindness are grown. And that's a real essential state. We do it directly through memories of those feelings toward others, and then what we call turning the light around. We do that in growing gratitude toward all the gifts, the amazing gifts we are each given every day. So by cultivating all of that, it makes it much easier to, to see that I can be a jerk. I can be a jerk. Let me see it. Let me see my jerk place. Oh, he's really scared. And then I get this go, oh, you're really hurting in there. What do you need? And I can actually be the best friend of my inner life. And that's a radically different relationship for most people.
And is that how you work with emotions without getting into more of a psychotherapy type?
Right.
Because I know you also studied with Fritz Perls, did you not?
Well, I studied Gestalt work, not directly with Fritz, but a number of his students. And it's really important to me to avoid two ever-present traps, I call them, on the path. One is sometimes gets the name spiritual bypassing. Which is using kind of concepts of spirituality or growth not to look at one's emotions, not to look at one's difficulties, to bypass them. Or what Eugene Genlin called process skipping, to skip over your difficult places. That's on one side. On the other side, I see a lot of wound worshiping, I call it. It's living in the therapeutic culture, where if you're in certain groups, there's always something to process and work on. And and both of these are unfortunate errors, in my opinion, that our whole inner life can be part of our unfolding, part of our learning process. And so how to use awareness with these states. So the way I work with feelings is very much like Feldenkrais, where we learn to make distinctions, get very clear about what we're feeling, how all feelings can be felt in the body. And so it's very body-based. Can you sense how you're carrying your anxiety? Forget the word anxiety. What is it? A tight belly? Is it this thing in your throat? Is it the sense that you want to hit or want to run? How can you get so intimate with your pattern of feeling and be with it in warm-hearted yet clear ways? So the pattern reveals itself because you're willing to be aware of it. And
would you like to just lead us in a short little I don't know what you would want to call it, maybe a little moment of coming back to ourselves before?
That would be delightful. Sure. So maybe close your eyes if that feels like a good thing. And whatever I say, if it doesn't feel right, ignore it, because I'm just here to assist you. So if it feels right, close your eyes and pause and let your attention come down into really feeling the reality of sitting, the sensations of your bottom, also the texture of the chair that you're on. If you're standing, sensing the ground through your feet, the texture of the floor. If you're lying down, how your whole body is supported by the sofa or bed. And to be present with those contact places and to linger there. And then, without losing the ground, like a tree rooted here, let your attention open to the environment without looking. Your brain has a map of the room you're in. Can you sense the dimensions, where the door is? Sounds can be very helpful to give you a sense of the larger space, because we're never only in a body. We're always in a larger space also. You can't really know your body only in your body. It's your body in a space. So notice if you can have, I'm sitting or I'm lying right on this spot, I can sense myself, and at the same time, I can sense around my body into the greater space. Let your body open. You'll feel the boundaries get a little tingly maybe. So you don't lose the base, but you open out like a tree branching. And then with all that here, in a very light way, not a very focused, strong way, sense the next 3 breaths from beginning to end. So you're sitting on this spot, breathing in this space, and you could have all of that almost effortlessly coming, going, but it all being nearby. And then you can bring your attention into your chest and belly where your brain tends to process feeling. And you can say to yourself, well, hello in there. How am I? How is it in there? And there's always feelings. There's always usually at least 2, 3, 4 different feeling states. More than emotion. Emotion are feelings, but there's also feelings of tired, energized, curious, bored. It's much more than classical emotion. So sitting in this chair, open to the world, you turn your attention to the inner world and say, hello. What are 2, 3, 4 words or images for how I am at this moment? When a word comes, notice, how is it in your body? I just noticed the sense, I'm curious if this is coming across. And that's a kind of liveliness all through my chest. I also sense a kind of settledness down in my pelvis and bottom. So there's a kind of lively curiosity and a settledness. And then you can keep recycling. I'm just here. Feelings come and go. Thoughts come and go. And always, I'm someplace in my breathing cycle. I'm always supported by the earth. And I'm always in a larger space. These are reliable touch points. Yeah. So then we can let our eyes open and yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's a joy. It's a joy. This is a kind of one of the real core practices of embodied life work that we do numbers of times during the day to find what I call the 0 point or neutral. So we're stepping off the train of thought, the train of doing, of the next thing, and we step kind of out of it for a few moments and just reconnect in a very embodied way into the freshness of the next moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a nice setup because I'm going to ask you about something that maybe is not a topic that we would love to talk about.
Well, I am open to that.
Great, great. So I know that one of the things that you've been willing to do is to sit with difficult things. You've gone to Germany, and I can't remember which camp that you sat with and have talked with survivors.
Yeah.
Auschwitz, yeah. And talk with survivors. And I don't want to compare what I'm about to bring up to that, but it at least fits the realm of difficult. So we have these times in human history where we become aware of things that we've been doing that aren't right. And we've been going through that. Excuse me, we've been going through that in our the Western world anyway, around the use of power and sexuality and abuse, and particularly towards women and children, but certainly not only women and children, as we know now. It can be anyone that's in a lower position of power. And we also know that the Feldenkrais world has not been exempt from that just like everybody else, we have had our own issues around it. And I wonder if you have some thoughts about how to help us make, I don't know if make sense is the right word, but maybe make sense, or maybe accept and really do the best we can do with the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me say first, I'm grateful that you're bringing the subject. It's not an easy one. First, as a male, as a white male, as a white, relatively affluent male, I'm in a position of power, and I feel, I would say, I like this term of Rudolf Steiner, a delicate shame for whether I have done things. I know in my past, I have at times as a teenager, I can remember treating women, objectifying women, and all, but more, I'm just so floored by the consistency internationally of these happenings. And of course, it is not a new something. It's coming to the surface that the abuse of power is the norm. And the abuse of power sexually is unbelievably consistent on every continent. And when I was in Africa, in Rwanda, and met Congolese women who were working with people who had been abused incredibly viciously by the Rwandan rebels and the Congolese military, it was so heartbreaking and so important for me to get. And then learning how often children are abused in Africa, and then knowing that's happening all over. And oh boy, that has, some years ago, this became a central subject. We raised money for organizations in the Embodied Life School because it feels so connected to freedom and embodiment of how do we, especially those of us in positions of power, recognize the vulnerability of those around us without making them less than they are. Because that's really important, that we don't disempower people through seeing them as disempowered.
Yeah, that's
so
big.
This is a key issue. The key issue. It happens a lot. It's not one side or the other. But Feldenkrais teachers really need to get that if somebody is lying on your floor, they have given up their adult authority to some degree. And the more effective students, especially in the first years, are those who are more willing to give up their adult self-image and turn over their power to your voice to a certain degree. And there is a certain regression of self-authority in lying down in the presence of another, on an FI table, on a floor. So we are in a unique, whether you feel insecure or not, if you are vertical and someone is horizontal, the geometry, the physics of the situation is you are empowered and they are not. Because most people lie down if they are children, if they're going to sleep and giving up their conscious self, if they're going to have sex, there's a giving up. And that's intrinsic to the relationships we have very often with people, even though we might not recognize that we've really changed the power dynamic. So that's important for us to have in consciousness. Our words have a much stronger effect. Jokes go in a different way.
Yes,
there's a joke you can make vertically that you can't make in that situation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got to be very mindful of that. Then how do we deal with people who are well developed in certain ways and really not developed in certain other ways? You know, the examples of the gurus who are abusing their students, the examples of Feldenkrais people who are misusing the fact that we're given permission to touch somebody, that we have that power and they've surrendered, and that unfortunately has been abused. As near as I can tell it, and I don't know, this is guessing, it doesn't get abused a lot, but it gets abused.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly my perception as well. And I don't think we have my perception is we do not have a systemic problem, where there may be in some cultures an actual systemic problem.
Right.
But we aren't, but it's important that we don't think we're different, however, that we are part of the culture.
Yes.
We are part of the culture. We didn't get a pass on it. The Catholic Church didn't get a pass on it. Actually, no religion that I've seen has gotten a pass on it. I wasn't raised Catholic. I was raised in a very conservative Christian church. We certainly didn't get a pass on it. And virtually every organization now, I think, if they haven't been brought out, will be brought out for having had some level of it, and in some level of complicity on the part of the hierarchy, and as well as all of us. I mean, for me, I stop and go, when have I been complicit in this and not really been willing to accept that I'm being complicit somehow?
Yes. Yeah, that's real. I think it's a really essential distinction that you made, that we probably don't have a systemic problem, but we are part of a culture. So it lives in us as well. And I would say when I was running Feldenkrais trainings, I didn't do enough to bring up the ethics questions before, as people were learning the work about, we give lip service to it a few times, but to really sit people down and go deeply into the vulnerability of people and the commitment to honoring and to have enough permission to have a conversation about being attracted to somebody. And what do you do when your hands are on somebody and you feel attraction? Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with that? That you're not alone in and we don't have those conversations.
No, and it's a significant growth issue. I mean, there is an element for all of us that your first exposure to anything is a significant growth moment. And your second one is a really big growth moment, because you might not have navigated the first one so well. But then you have an opportunity to reflect, if you've been given good training, and and decide to do different the second time.
Yes.
Even as a woman, so let me take it away from a male perspective for a moment. So even as a woman, I mean, yeah, I mean, sometimes people come in and they're dressed, they're very attractive, and they're dressed in ways that are maybe a little bit more exposing or even provocative in a way. That might not be their intention. I'm not saying that's their intention, but that's how it can feel to me as the person. And so I have a little moment there, right? I got some decision points that I can make there. And that's not even somebody who's necessarily really giving themselves over to me in a really vulnerable way. And then there are those people as well.
Right.
So it's a lot of growing. It's a lot of growing on everybody's part, which is not
so
to
true.
use serial offenders in any way. I'm not trying to do that.
Right. Well, I think I can say it was much easier, it has been much easier for me to be in a very committed monogamous relationship for a long time. I notice colleagues who were not in relationships. It's more in training programs. There is an attraction to people in power, and it can sometimes it's an abuse of power, whether the person in power is initiating it or they are responding in ways that are connected to their power. So,
yes.
And so we recognize now there are some wonderful marriages that have grown out of trainers and students getting together. But I think I think it's a good decision that we say, if that attraction is there, get in a different training. Don't work in that training, but that we can't maintain a teacher-student relationship, a trainer-student relationship, and have a personal sexual relationship. In my opinion,
they don't go together.
It's just too dangerous. And I'm just getting back from, there's a situation in Europe that I don't think is being handled well, partially because of people get into certain positions, either on boards or running centers or running trainings, and people don't want to question them because they have jobs with them, and so there gets to be some convoluted relationships. And I just think it's so essential that we that we speak it, we call it out, we name it, and that we get more consistent about that.
Yeah. So it seems to me that this is actually part of the whole evolutionary process right here. That it is a bit of the freedom, but it's more than that, because what we thought of as being free 50 years ago is not the same thing that we think of as being free now. And the reason for that, from my perspective, is that we are evolving.
Yes.
And our ability to care and expand in caring can continue and has sort of no boundaries in that.
Right. Well, back when I started, in the 70s, with great thanks to the women's movement, as well as so much of what was happening, through the 60s, 70s, the questionings of authority and all like that, the sexual liberation that allowed women to come forward sexually in ways that they had not been able to earlier, including the pill was helpful for that, and other social issues. But so now part of freedom for a woman is to be able to express herself sexually and to be in a training program where you're attracted to a teacher. And one of the messages you're getting now from the culture is you are now empowered to act upon that. Right?
True,
and so
absolutely.
the trainer goes, well, I'm here to treat you as an adult, not as a child. So yes, we can have that relationship and be aware enough that it's, and I would say back then, it was less of a transgression than it would be now.
Right. That
because
our ideas around that have changed.
exactly. And I think we need to acknowledge that and really update our sense of what is freedom in this kind of situation. There was a little bit of cultural need for expression, a little naivete also about implicit power structures that are, you might be able to say, oh, I can overlook that because I'm an adult, but the way we work, we are a multitude and we have many levels of ourselves that we can't always override through a conscious decision. So I think being more, in the best sense of the word, more conservative about what we allow ourselves in situations that are where the power structure is implicitly unequal.
Yeah, to me, it feels like it's a contract. There's a contract in the relationship for me, so between you, so I have studied some with you. I would love to study some with you in the future, which is not, so for me, the contract becomes that I have accepted you as the teacher. And within that, I believe that you're going to fulfill some certain parts of that contract, which is to keep that role for me.
Beautiful. Yes.
It's not that I feel less than you. I feel not at all less than you, but I do think you have some things to offer me.
Right.
If I want to learn, I do feel I need to be able to have relationships, which are teacher-based relationships.
Right.
By contrast, someone who comes in and is a student of mine or someone who's a client of mine, then I agree to play that role for them. And part of playing that role is not screwing it up. I mean, is remembering what the role is and that there are boundaries that go with that role and that contract.
That's right. And if you want to change that, you need to change the contract.
Right.
and
yes,
your relationship. And to try to mix those is very dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you continue to explore your work in this incredible blend of different fields of study and exploration into something that is uniquely called the embodied life, where do you see us going as a human race? Where are we going?
What an amazing time to be alive. And the first thing that I just need to start with is the incredible, unique privilege we have. That we, and I'm guessing the people listening to this would fit into this, our basic needs are covered. We are relatively safe. No one's 100% safe ever, but we are safe. We are well fed. Our biggest problem with food is not to eat too much. We are sheltered. Our basic needs are met. We are so incredibly privileged. And then to add to that, the privilege of authentic teachings that help us to be more of ourselves. So the first thing is just the people listening to this are the top 10th of the top 1%, because the top 1%, most of them don't ever hear teachings like this. So I just want to honor that we have been incredibly blessed in this life. Okay, so then where are we going? Because we are in a certain way a leading edge of the evolution of consciousness, in my opinion. That doesn't mean other beings who are in different conditions are not contributing, but it's a different something if you're struggling to eat and struggling to keep your kids safe. So where is this going? In my opinion, there's a phrase I use that sounds a little like a bumper sticker, but it really goes deep for me in my everyday life and in my teachings, is the movement from fear to love as the dominant operating principle. And what that means to me is our DNA says be safe first. And that's a good thing. We don't want to get rid of fear. We don't want to get rid of self-protection. That's not about, but we've got a lot of that already covered. So we don't need to go through everyday life running on the programs that evolved thousands and thousands of years ago, telling us to basically approach other beings, approach moments as it's basically unsafe, but find out if you're safe. And we don't need to live like that anymore, most of us. We need to be ready to protect ourselves, but not live with fear leading us. Mm-hmm. That we can actually learn to evolve toward, I am connected to this, to every being in this life, and I am here with absolute goodwill towards this moment of being alive. Mm-hmm. That's how human beings are when we feel, when we're not controlled by our fear, when we're not controlled by our confusion, we basically have goodwill. It's what Buddhists call basic goodness. Mm-hmm. And it truly is. When I go all over the world in poor neighborhoods, and people are basically kind when they're not confused. Mm-hmm. And when they're present and awake and they've touched into their own hearts, they want life to blossom. Even people they don't know, they'd rather they were well than hurting, and mm-hmm. wants the planet to blossom. This is natural to human beings, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So the evolution is toward enough inner security, enough capacity for noticing the very deep old programs that are living in us, that are not only from our personal life, but are from our parents, 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 their parents, their parents, their parents. We are carrying a huge history right now. And it's only through a rather highly developed awareness that we can notice these fear patterns, these self-protective patterns, these self-diminishing patterns, these diminishing other patterns, and be able to, in the light, in the warmth, and in the clarity of our awareness, have new choices, new possibilities. Mm-hmm. And when enough of us are manifesting that enough of the time, I think is the critical point for the evolution of our next step.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm. That's a great vision. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a very wonderful vision with you in your pink shirt. And I know we're running a little bit over.
Right.
Would you be able to take a couple questions anyway?
Sure, sure. I'm happy to. Yeah, I'm having a good time.
You're having great, because I am too. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We would love to have you go live and see your beautiful face and hear your voice. If you don't want to, you can also put that in the question and I'll ask it for you. While we're waiting for you to maybe offer a few questions, let's talk a little bit about what you've got going on, Russell, because you do have some opportunities coming up. You've got a couple of retreats, I believe.
Yeah, I've got a very full schedule. I'm blessed to have wonderful people supporting me all over the world. And I really do feel that mm-hmm. my learning is so much through being with people and working together in these ways. So yeah, this coming weekend, I'm in Salt Lake City. The
May
next
21st.
Week. Yeah.
May 21st, 25th, you're going to be in Brighton Bush for
I've got 2 weeks. Let's see, I've got a weekend in Salt Lake, a weekend in Portland, and then a 5-day seminar in Brighton Bush Hot Springs.
Oh, that's 5 days.
Anyone who's never been there, it goes from Monday evening to Friday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And anyone who's never been there, it's in the National Forest, natural hot springs, completely off the grid. It's the electrical grid. It's run on geothermal energy from under the earth. Brighton Bush River is flowing through. It is one of the most nourishing environments you'll ever experience. And we've got some places available in that retreat. And if you contact my office or go to my website, which is myname.com, check it out. It's really exquisite. And then for folks in Europe, I'll be doing another tour in July, Germany, Sweden, France, and then back here at Esalen in August, and further, I'll be on the East Coast this fall. I'm doing a seminar in New York and one in Boston. So there's a bunch of places people could find me. I'm in Europe 4 times a year, and yeah.
Yeah, and those are some nice short to slightly medium tastes of your work.
Right.
And then you have something called the Embodied Mentorship Program. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. So the Embodied Life Mentorship grew out of people coming to these kinds of retreats and seminars and wanting to go deeper. So we meet for 2 residential weeks a year for 3 years. So it's 6 one-week meetings. I have them in Europe and in California. And the next ones will start in about 1.5 years. They start every few years. I usually have 2 going in the States and 2 in Europe at a given time. And they're wonderful they're challenging because you're meditating at 7 in the morning, you're working after dinner at night, but they're for the right person at the right time. There's nothing like the mentorship. It's a very integrated program of learning.
Sounds fabulous. So it looks like we may have just given people so much to think about that they can't even wrap their mind around a question, which is plenty. I think we did give people a lot to think about. And let me just see here. So we do have a couple of comments that have come in, and this one is saying, we want to thank you both for addressing the power issue and love the conversation around evolution. That came in from someone anonymous. So thank you so much for letting us know that. And I did see over in the chat as well that there was some appreciation for that conversation. I think it's important to be willing to talk about the difficult stuff and not just all the really lovely
and
stuff.
Actually, can I take a moment to say one more thing?
Sure, absolutely.
Because it's a gift for me to have the forum that you've created. And what I want to say is part of this evolution of consciousness, in my opinion, there's a certain responsibility that goes with the privilege that we have for both what I talked about in terms of security, economics, et cetera, but to hear teachings like this, or to, more importantly, engage in paths of freedom, however people define that for themselves. And what I want to say is one of the big steps, in my opinion, is, can we become the people who seek to understand before being understood? Somebody has to put the weapon down first. And so I wrote about a story that happened about 1.5 years ago, being on a long plane trip with a very strong Trump supporter, and I was of a different political orientation, and realizing right off the impulse to argue, or the impulse to, and really deciding to walk my talk and just really hear what in this human being was behind their opinion. So to get out of the level of strategy, out of the level of what was their decision, I think we need to stand up to our, oh, you're really scared for your children. Well, I am too. And what I notice is every human being has fundamental values that I can relate to if I can step beyond the level of discourse that is usually like 2 televisions looking at each other, babbling at each other, and nobody is listening.
Yeah.
So we all want the other one to listen first. But the higher your level of consciousness, you're more and more willing, both with our spouses, our kids, and in life. Doesn't mean give up your values, doesn't mean give up your opinions, doesn't mean not standing up for human rights. It means hearing the other first, which in my opinion takes a lot of practice and a lot of embodiment because we freak out in our bodies and we don't know that we're freaking out. And we just start talking and yelling and saying, you can't say that. To learn the warning signs that we are triggered, we are activated. Can I find enough presence in those moments, not to give up my view, but to hear first? And I so wish in our community to grow that capacity.
Well, actually, we did have a question that came in that really, I think, fits this. And they asked me to read it. In the deep orientation shift from surviving to thriving, what do we need to open ourselves to see within so this transition feels like the natural next step and not a threat?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Surviving to thriving. I like that. Yeah, let's all feel into that. And it's so good for us all to pause and take in. This is a question, not a theoretical question only, but a living question for us, because every one of us sometimes feels threatened. Sometimes it's something our loved one does. Sometimes it's political. How to make that shift? So what I just said, I want to reiterate. To ground oneself in one's body is the infrastructure for being able to stay present in a challenging situation. That's such a overlooked aspect of empowerment. I believe when Feldenkrais changed from being a judo teacher to teaching people this work, he realized he didn't have to teach people to fight. He needed to teach people to be in their bodies, moving from center, finding that pelvis, moving from having the dignity of a long spine, noticing when they're in their contractions, because the fear-based states are always contracted. So our embodiment is a direct doorway to, can I tolerate this moment? Then our breathing into the space that opens when you're not so contracted, or if you are already contracted, to have the awareness to say, okay, in there, I'm with you. The conscious being, is not the contracted one. In my language, the contracted state is the historic self, and the true being, the I, is here to take care of all those historic states. So I differentiate. Every part of us is a part of us, but no part is all of us. And the space in which every voice, every reaction, every feeling, every thought appears lives in this larger space called, whether you want to call it the true I self, or the I without particularity, or the spaciousness of being is a beautiful way to put that. But within the spaciousness of being is the history of the Russell. And I need to see, when is that history in alignment with the being, and when is it pulling against, and what does it need from the other parts of myself? So to be grounded in our bodies and to grow that kind of self-reflective consciousness, which is what awareness is, to be here and know that we're here. It's a meta level. It's here, and at the same time, we know, in Feldenkrais's words, we know and know that we know. And so you're both present in this condition, and you're always larger than the particularities. And when that can live together, we have the capacity to survive, to not only survive, but to thrive. And I'm wondering how the questioner, how all that landed, if they're still there and that has meant anything.
Yeah, we'll give them a moment. I think we all need to sit with that for a moment.
Yeah, it's a lot. So pausing is one of the great gifts to give ourselves, to pause and see, where does that land? What says yes? What says no? What says it's impossible? What says, oh, of course, that's true. I know it's true in my core.
Mm-hmm. Well, her response is beautiful. Thank you.
Well,
and that your description and what it accesses is very powerful.
Well, thank you so much.
We're going to take one last one, and this is from someone that says, I wrestle with how to view abusers in their whole humanness.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Oh, not easy. Not easy. Not easy. What? I've been so blessed to spend my whole life with this kind of teaching. I had one real job. The rest of the time I've been doing this kind of stuff. And the real job was,
job. I like that. One real job. What was your one real job?
My one real job lasted 1 year. I was 20 years old. I'd graduated college early, and I was already meditating and had done yoga and stuff, and I'm 20, and I got a job in a drug rehabilitation center where somehow I had been to the Gestalt Institute of Canada, and they thought I knew something. I was way out of my league. And they put me in charge of group therapy for people coming out of prison and being a counselor. 20 years old, way out. Okay. So one of the things I learned there, dealing with people who were pimps and had hurt other people and even rapists, was what my director taught me probably the second week I was there, saying, hurt people hurt people. It's the most profound statement. Hurt people hurt people. And that's when this guy, Charlie, who was one of my clients, one of the people I had to supervise, who had been a child abuser and drug dealer, and they let him out to come to this halfway house I was working in. Everyone hated Charlie. He was the worst. He never showered, never did. I mean, he was a really despicable person. They knew his history. And I don't want to go through the whole story. We had group encounters. And when you heard Charlie's story about how he was locked in a closet and how he was abused he was rented out by his father you finally saw that this is a human being in there who is acting out of their pain. And so if I don't know a person's pain, I assume it. That never justifies their action. But we got to separate the being from the action. Hold them responsible for their action, but don't cast them out of humanity. There are no exiles. And that's hard. But the women from the Congo who ran City of Joy taught me that this is essential for our unfolding. Otherwise, we live in resentment and we eat the poison over and over. So see the human being and never forget, never trivialize the action. It was never all right, but the human being is not cast out.
And that's true for each of us then.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the big, I think the message that all of us probably most deeply want to know is that we are not cast out, that we all belong. And
we all belong, and we are all not only belong, but are essential to the unfolding of all of us. We are not interchangeable with other beings. And that is amazing. And Feldenkrais saw that. He saw the uniqueness of each of us and really wanted us to grow into that. And it is our fear-based patterns that stop us from that. And our capacity to work with and through those patterns is our liberation. We are liberated from and through our delusion. Our delusion is central to our delusion, meaning our fear and our confusion, is central to our awakening. So it's not that that's the bad stuff, it's how do we work with it? That's the path. And we are so blessed to be on this path.
Yeah. Oh, we've been talking to Russell Delman. You can find out more about Russell at russelldelman.com. We've put a link to his programs in the chat, but you can also go to his website, or if you ever get confused, you can go to www.feldenkraissummit.com. You can click on any speaker's name and you will be able to find the links to their programs.
Great.
What a powerful 90 minutes, Russell. And I absolutely will have to listen to this myself several times. I've been writing little notes, but mostly I've been taking in the feeling sensation of it and trying to manage my own feeling sensation and also do this role. Do this little role.
Amazing.
It's such a pleasure to get to connect with you. I was so looking forward to it. It's an opportunity to me to actually have a real felt heart connection with someone within the summit. So that it turned out that you were the last person to wrap things up is just absolutely fabulous for me personally.
Well,
and I think for others
so
as well.
Much. And it's a great gift you gave to all of us. Bless you. Thank you. And till next time.
Yes, yes. And so this concludes our session with Russell Delman, and also is the last official session of the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. We are going to offer a makeup session tomorrow for the parkour and Feldenkrais methods, so that the parkour trainer is actually going to be able to join us, and there'll be a really lively discussion, I believe, between him and our Feldenkrais practitioner. So you can see that tomorrow if you want to tune in at 3:30 p.m. EDT time. The recording of this session will be up in the morning because we're going to go to sleep. Arlene and I are going to go to sleep, and then we'll put it up in the morning, and it will be up for at least 24 hours after we make it accessible, free. You can also purchase the entire series with unlimited access to each recording and an audio download, as well as fantastic bonus Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons from a number of the speakers. So on behalf of Future Life Now, this is Cynthia Allen. Thank you so much, Russell, for joining us, and thank all of you for joining us. We really appreciate your attention tonight.
Thank you. Bless us all.
Thank you.